Okay, welcome horticulture class. This is the tomato greenhouse here in Chino. Whether you're in Verdi or Chino or in your own hothouse, I wanted to show you a few techniques for taking care of hothouse tomatoes in the greenhouse. Some things to look for, and then when you're doing your weekly work and maintaining your own personal tomatoes in this greenhouse, your own personal responsibility, there's some things to look forward for that I want to show you. Okay, suckers are a problem in the greenhouse. I'm going to show you the removal of a sucker because we are training these vines to grow straight up. Naturally, a tomato plant will grow bushy. At each connection where there's a leaf, what can possibly arise is a sucker. In this case, the student has done pretty well to remove the suckers out, forcing the tomato to go straight up. The problem, as you can imagine, is if you allow these suckers to continue to grow, there's no way to have enough strings to hold all of that. It's not functional in the greenhouse. So we remove those. Typically, if you're doing this every week and you're spending time on your tomatoes, you can remove them when they're this big. Take it right out, that's a sucker. This sucker is like a new plant. And so you could start this. The deal is, these are not good tomatoes for outdoor production. We have specific hybrid tomatoes that like to grow like this. They're self-pollinated. The value is that they have roots that are acceptable to hydroponic production. So don't spend a lot of time thinking that this will be a good outdoor production type of tomato. But what I was mentioning is you could clone this, root this very easily, and you have a new plant. This is just like a tomato seedling, except it's an exact parent clone replica of the parent. But as you keep pushing your tomato upwards, each week what you're going to do is you're going to keep your plant at about this 5 to 6 foot height here. And so as your tomato grows about a foot in a week, this tomato will need to be lowered there on that wire. So we grab onto that, unhook about 3 to 4 winds of that, would it be the equivalent of a foot. That'll lower this tomato plant down a foot. And when you do that, you slide it over. These tomatoes are going from west to east in this greenhouse. I guess it's north. It's south to north in this greenhouse, to be exactly specific. And in this case, the vines are laying down on the ground, and then they're rising back up to 5 to 6 feet. And so this person's doing a good job. They just lowered this plant. This is about the lowest you want it, because in a week, it's going to be right here. It's going to be up a foot. They're going to wind it down a foot. They're going to drop it down, and they're going to slide it again to the north on that runner. Also, as you're doing your weekly work, you need to look for any pests or issues, problems. And now, one thing to look for that's been a problem in this greenhouse this year is mealy bugs. And so as I look up this plant, I notice some of this white stuff in here. This is mealy bugs. I just broke one open, and it's right in here along the top of the tomato. If you just rub those out, look for them on the stem. If you see one, like right there, right along the string, just wipe it off. That will be gone. And right here along the top of the tomato, they like to hide out there. Just wipe them off. If that bothers you, grab a paper towel or something and wipe them out. We can do more good that way if the numbers are small to keep populations in check. And what we're really looking for on the tomatoes, that's the adults. But if you look here, you might not even be able to see them, but I see the adult crawler. That little teeny spot, I got it on my fingernail. That's an adult crawler. The crawlers can move from space to space. Once they get locked in somewhere, they like tight cracks and stuff. They like these stems of the tomatoes. They like where the leaf connects. Look for those there and just wipe them out. If they start to get big numbers, then we'll spray for them. Okay, on this tomato we got an issue. Here is a leaf And here is what should be a flower set. The flowers are already setting, forming tomatoes, but now we got a foliage issue coming off of there. I think this has a lot to do with nutrients, and it could be because we pumped some extra nitrogen during Christmas break to get these things going again. And so either with your finger or with clippers, you want to break that out, because you don't want this being vegetative. This ends in a tomato, and so it's like a sucker is growing off the end of your tomato plant. So cut those off, those foliage tips. Here is a normal looking flower cluster, but it's also doing the same thing. I see a vegetative aspect there, and so when I see this when it's young, I'll just pinch it out. Okay, when the moisture is going and the irrigation is on, you need to look for this. The sidewalk is getting wet here, and I look down in, the bag has been folded down, and this emitter is wrong. It's spraying mostly out of the bag. These get bumped frequently, so just turn it in and point it down slightly, and maybe even lift up the edge of the bag to keep the water going where it needs to be. Okay, the older leaves, once they're down past the ripening tomatoes, they don't serve a purpose. So the leaves that do serve a purpose, for instance, this cluster right here, gets nutrition from the set of leaves below it, the set of leaves at it, and one set of leaves above it. And so removing this leaf would cause these tomatoes not to have enough photosynthetic properties feeding and pumping into this. This is a source, and this is a sink. So you want these leaves as healthy as possible feeding these. If I was to cut these leaves off, these tomatoes wouldn't develop to the size that they could potentially be. Down the stem, as you get down past tomatoes, you can cut off the older leaves. You'll notice they'll start to get ratty looking and kind of start to become a problem. You just cut them off flush with the stem, and you're training that trunk upright. As you're training a plant onto the string, this plant's getting a little big. It's kind of hanging a bit. So I like to take the plant and either wind the plant around the string or wind the string around the plant. You decide which one's easier, but what we're looking for here is, it's a little tricky to do it one-handed, but there we go. What we're looking for is in between nodes, here's a node and here's a node, and the string comes around in between each node. The string comes around in between each node. So between every set of leaves, you loop the string around. So as this plant continues to grow, we'll wrap the plant around it, or we can take the string off and we can wrap the string around it. If you want to do it that way, it's best to work in groups of two, so one person can hold the string and one person can wind the plant around, or wind the string around. Okay, here's a part that everybody's afraid to do. Nobody wants to talk about it, nobody wants to do it, but I'm going to show you the situation where too many fruit that have set are going to cause too small of fruit in the finished product. So think about all the source and sink potential. 5 beefsteak tomatoes is the max that we want to run in here. This is Geronimo tomatoes, but it's a beefsteak type. And so if more than 5 are setting, cut your losses, cut off multiple flowers, don't even let it waste energy into producing those that will never make it up to speed. Let me show you one here. In this case, you got a nice fruit set here, you got a nice fruit set here, and then you got just starting the set, and in this case, you got a flower that's just beginning. So if we let all these ripen, you got issues there. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's 6. And in this case, these are way ahead, and these are way behind. I personally, in this case, maybe 3 would be appropriate. 5 is a good number, but these 2 are way ahead of these. And it might have something to do with the fact that there's a leaf coming out right after these tomatoes. That might be robbing energy for these ones. And so in this case, those ones are so far behind, I'm going to snip off everything above these 2. These 3 are gone. I took them off. This leaf, there's no purpose in it. I'm taking it off, and there's a little sucker there. I'm just going to continue to let 2 ripen here. And when I come back, these 2 are going to be looking like these 3. okay? Quite a bit bigger. But I would even venture to say, look at this. Oh, actually, there's 2 really nice ones and then 2 really small ones. That's okay, but just I want you to keep in mind, if we would have just kept these 2, how much bigger would these ones be? We got the same issue. So 2 that we're going to be hard-pressed to give away and 2 that could probably go to market. And so you the rule of thumb is 5, but we've had our nutrient issues and such, and we've had vegetative material. So think about what's going on here. I don't know whose tomato plant this is, but I'm going to help them along. I'm going to take those 2 off. They weren't going to make it. They weren't going to get any bigger than they already were. The leaves below them are gone, so what's working to increase these? Only this leaf here above it. 1 leaf developing all these. This leaf here, it's got work to do. It's trying to ripen these tomatoes. This leaf up here is trying to ripen these tomatoes. These leaves are trying to develop these. And so as we get in a system of taking off the older tomatoes, you'll see what I mean. Here's a perfect example. This is a Geronimo tomato. It's looking pretty healthy, but obviously it went through some trauma at some point. The stem is really skinny right in through here. And I would imagine that was during Christmas break when we were kind of out of nutrients. All of a sudden we started pumping up the nutrients and it started growing. Now it looks really good. It's thicker up here than it is down here. That's a transport issue. But now look at these tomatoes. These tomatoes are about the size of cherry tomatoes, and they're going to be smaller than the tomatoes that are going to be developing right there. In 1 week, there'll be tomatoes there on those flowers that are bigger than that. So why in the world are we wasting all this time for in another week we'll have a red tomato? These aren't cherry tomatoes. We can't box these up. This is no good for what we want this plant to do. The quicker we bite the bullet and take these off and take these off, the quicker this plant is developing larger beefsteak type tomatoes. So these tomatoes in this greenhouse look really good. The students are doing great work on them. Look at the uniformity down the line. Look at all the tomatoes getting ready to harvest. It's just that's hard for people to say, okay, this is way down on the stem. Obviously these material are behind. Now you gotta be careful. I see small tomatoes here, but these are new tomatoes. These have the potential to grow quite large. So just know where they are. Here's the top. Know where those tomatoes are along the stem and determine whether they need to go. Nice sized tomato. This is what we're looking for. Something pushing a pound. This is not what we're looking for. We're ripening a tiny little cherry tomato. That's gumball size right there. That's okay. That's worth keeping. I have no idea what's going on here. 1 tomato by itself probably luckily got this big because that was probably during the time of our deficiency. And now we're pumped up and we're going again. The tomatoes that we're going to have up in here, these are going to be nice, decent sized tomatoes.